Welcome to the 24th Annual D.I.C.E Awards conversation on outstanding achievement for an independent game. Some of our nominated titles come from extremely small teams, but even that being the case, their peers have recognized them for their ability to make so much with so little and with such small teams. This is one of my favorite categories, and I'm really excited to talk about the nominees today. First up from Hades, we have Darren Korb. How are you doing, Darren?
I am doing great. How about yourself?
Good. I'm excited to have you here. Give the folks at home a little bit of information about the work you've done in this space.
Sure. Yeah, I'm the audio director for Supergiant Games, and I've done the music and sound design and voiceover direction for all 4 of the Supergiant games, including Hades.
Fantastic. So excited to have you here. From If Found, we have Laura McGee. How you doing, Laura? How's everything going?
Yeah, everything's great. Delighted to be here too.
Excited to have you. Let the folks at home know a little bit of information about yourself as well.
Yeah, so this past year in 2020, we released If Found. I was the director on the project, and we've been working on it for a couple of years before that. And I kind of come out of like an experimental games background, and this kind of takes this erasing mechanic and then tells the story of a woman kind of erasing her diary and trying to erase herself, and then a hopeful end to it, hopefully.
Very cool. Excited to have you here. Coming from Kentucky Route Zero TV edition, we have Jake Elliott. How are you doing, Jake?
Hi, I'm doing great, thanks.
Good. Give the folks at home a little info about yourself as well.
So I'm Jake, and I'm one of 3 people who make up the team that worked on Kentucky Route Zero. For the most part, it's me and Tomas Kamency and Ben Babbitt are the other 2 guys. My role was writing and some programming and design stuff that we kind of shared with the whole group.
Very cool. Thank you so much for being here. And from Noita, we have Arvi Takari. How are you doing, Arvi?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I hope you are still doing fine despite this break between the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm excited to have you all here and let the folks at home know a little bit of information about the work you've done in this space as well.
Yeah, so I'm kind of 1/3 of the Noita team. Nowadays, 1/4. I don't know exactly how the maths work there, but let's say I'm one of the original 3 people who started work on that game. I'm the non-programmer person in the team. I've done like design and art and stuff while leaving the actually difficult parts for the smart people in the team. No. I'm happy with the work I've done, but it's been quite a journey. Noita, it's a unique kind of thing. So it's been really exciting to see it kind of grow and give my part to it.
Fantastic. So excited to have you here as well. And last but not least, we have our friends from Toge Productions, Coffee Talk. How are you doing, Chris?
Good. Thank you.
Awesome. Give the folks a little bit of information about the work you've done in this space as well.
Yeah, so I started making games in around 2009, and that's and we started as a Flash game developer, making casual Flash games on the web, and that's how we started Toge Productions. And we've been basically making indie games and helping other Indonesian game developers publish their games to the global market. And now we're not only a game developer, but we also publish other Southeast Asian game developers to the global market.
So let's get into it. I'm excited to have you all here again. This is one of my favorite parts of the show, one of my favorite categories, because I have such a big love of the indie space and all the work that you all kind of have done. It's extremely hard to make a game, and especially within the indie space, being a part of, kind of really small teams and trying to figure out ways to bridge out, how to kind of make the best game with the resources that you have. I'm really just curious about, for each of you, in your independent studios, tell us what the kind of most challenging parts of, developing a game with a small team is, and kind of imagine, for the amounts of games that we have seen make it, there are so many that don't. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about, for your games in particular, like how did you actually kind of bridge that gap? How did you get it over the finish line and finally make it? Darren, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this initially, and we'll kind of run the horn to see other thoughts from other folks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the most important things you can do, especially as an independent developer, is have like a smart scope for the project you're working on, something that you're going to be able to make a big impact with the small amount of resources that you have, and how can you use those resources in an efficient, effective way that's going to play to the strengths of the team.
Laura, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that too. I think, with the game you've made, it feels like you all had this very cohesive, thought behind what you wanted to kind of put out in the world, and hearing what Darren talked about in terms of resources, I'm sure that might kind of resonate as well.
I think like there's always this challenge of figuring out what the game is about, like what's that core thing that's like the most important bit. And like you spend a lot of time like so much of like, I'd say the first half or the first 2/3 of your project, you're creating ideas and you're adding all this stuff. And then at some point you gotta like, you're adding ideas without knowing where it's going, and it's figuring out where it's going to end up that allows you to then cut everything and get to, okay, here is our end point, or here is like the most important part of the game.
But
When
please
they
think
found,
of
like,
the
another big
feature creep.
Yeah, like totally. And you kind of like, I mean, that's the nice thing about deadlines is like, okay, I gotta like figure this out as soon as possible. At least I'll put, okay, we're showing the game off. I think for us, like one of our first like public points was showing it at PAX in 2019 and putting a trailer at the same time. And it was like, oh crap, let's just get whatever we can together to show it to the public, and like hopefully it'll be cool. And then when you get that done, it's like, oh yeah, this is all right, like let's finish this. That's like a good way of going about it.
Yeah.
The other thing for us was like building a team, because this was our first project of this kind of scale. So yeah, finding like the right team members and stuff to collaborate with was like an ongoing challenge. But yeah, it's been nice to get here for sure.
Yeah. Arvi, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that too. I think, you talked about the kind of, feature creep part that winds up being a part of the space. How did you kind of deal with that in terms of making your game?
Yeah, so other things said here have already resonated very heavily for me or us. I definitely feel that one of the big difficulties for us with Noita was that we had a really cool idea of this pixel physics, everything is simulated kind of thing. And then turning that into an actual game was obviously the technical stuff, the engine and things took time, but really the design was the really big thing that we had to figure out. And in that sense, I wish that always, when everyone started a game project, they had a really kind of solid idea of scope and what we are doing. But sometimes you end up in a situation where you really don't. And from when we developed Noita, I joined the project in 2012. And I think we decided what kind of a game we are making in 2016 or 15. So that was a bunch of years of like throwing things at the wall and just kind of understanding that we have this really cool thing. How do we convey that it's cool for the players? What kind of a game would tell that story in the most interesting way? And also relating to kind of the team, there's also just kind of figuring out how to work on a team if you have a game project that suddenly turns out to go for a really long time. How can you manage the social experience? Because of course it's a social thing. You develop a thing together. Everyone has different opinions. Everyone has different views. How do you make sure that no one gets left behind? No one gets kind of frustrated, or at least more frustrated than the others with the project. It's definitely a big amount of work, but I'm happy that where Noita ended up was way cooler than I would have expected, I guess, in like 2012 when I saw the first prototype.
I want to come back to that in a minute, because I think there's some really good meat on the bone in terms of working with team members and working across ideas when it comes to that. But I want to give Jake a second to kind of answer the initial how did you kind of get it across the finish line question, and I have a follow-up for all of you around that too. So Jake, what was the kind of process in that for you?
Yeah, well, for us, I mean, it was we had a sort of an idea of a scope when we started the project, and we like almost immediately like tripped over that and fell into this completely other project that we ended up actually developing, and it took us, like 9.5 years or something like that instead of the 18 months that we were hoping for originally. And so the challenge for us was really similarly, like, just how do you keep the team, which was the three of us, how do we all keep engaged and passionate and stable, financially stable, emotionally stable, dealing with this long-term project. And that was really tricky to find out, or to work out how to do that, I think. Yeah, but I'm grateful for the, one thing I think with all of us here was we have these pretty small teams that were, we were really invested in these teams, and the having gone through that process, it was very difficult and it was expensive and took a lot out of us, but it felt like we were building the team, learning how to do this so that we can try to do it again in the future and stuff, and strengthening our relationships as collaborators, the three of us and stuff. So it feels like a worthwhile investment of blood, sweat, and tears. I think at least at that level, we can continue to work in this way.
For sure.
I think that perseverance is so important as well. Before we started working with our publisher, I think we were starting like a new project every 3 or 4 months, because each time it just kept getting too big. So having that, okay, this is the one we have to finish this time, was really helpful. But then you get to the end, you have, here's all the things that we had to cut. Like, we could just make a game with all this stuff now, which is kind of nice. It's like a constant, you gotta kind of train yourself to finish it, I think, a little bit as well, rather than just working on the cool, exciting things.
Well, I'm curious because I love the fact that you kind of pointed to that, because the hardest part, especially kind of in the indie space, is one, avoiding as much feature creep as you possibly can while trying to keep everyone focused and doing that part of it. And then you also have those moments of the year when your game is almost about to come out, and then you're like, PAX is going to be a thing. We have to figure out a way to show a vertical slice of this game in a way that's going to keep people excited, or get them kind of in the space too. I'm curious to hear how much of that has changed in terms of the conversations you're all having amongst your peers about we need to figure out how to build up the vertical slice in a way that feels good, but also actually represents and shows your game off well, in a way that feels kind of genuine in that way. Jake, I want to go back to you on that, because your game is very much a narrative-based one in that way, and there's parts to it that kind of lean into that kind of segmented version of it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, right. Well, we decided to release the game in episodes, and a big part of that, it wasn't our initial vision for the game, but a big part of that decision was about exactly this, maintaining, feeding the audience, nurturing the audience, at the same time as we were talking about kind of trying to keep our team alive. We're just trying to keep the audience alive. And it was really hard for us to share teasers and things like that, because we were very sensitive about not spoiling these sort of moments of novelty or surprise that were kind of load bearing in our story. And so it was really hard to figure out how to keep in touch with the audience. And I think things have changed a lot in that sphere in independent games, maybe more than anything else. Like, the way that the audience finds the games is really different now than it was in 2010 when we started working on our game. And now we have stuff like itch.io, and we also have, when we started working on Kentucky Route Zero, Steam was like a totally closed marketplace. So now it's open for for everybody to submit games through. That's really awesome, and itch.io is really awesome, and there are kind of other great sort of marketplaces and communities for where the audience can keep up on the game. That's one of the changes that I think has been really positive.
I want to stick with that really quickly with you. I think since your game kind of started from within the Kickstarter campaign ecosystem, and you've seen the game kind of move through its 5 acts, and publish those to console and PC. Kind of thinking back, do you think that has changed kind of the way that most indie games kind of think about development now? They feel like they have these kind of extra avenues to kind of be in that space, and having it through those extra places.
Like, as opposed to a publisher or something. Is that what you're saying? Like the crowdfunding stuff? Yeah, that stuff is really cool. It's been great that it's sort of at least destabilized some of the kind of stable, sort of constrained, limited ways that people could get games out. At least shook things up a bit. the same thing happened with Kickstarter that happens with everything, which is that at first, like indies and small actors can get access to it, and then people figure out how to take advantage of it. And now, the Kickstarter, like when we did a Kickstarter for Kentucky Route Zero, our goal was like $7,000 or something like that. And then, a year later, the numbers started getting really big with like Double Fine Adventure and stuff. And it's like millions of dollars. So this is just like a different focus, for that platform. But I think like seeing things shake up that way with crowdfunding led to a lot of the stuff that is still very accessible for small independent artists, and that stuff is still going strong. I think Itch is still going strong. I think Itch is one of those, and Patreon is another one. And then there's also just like social changes. People are more open to relating to games in this way, to having a sort of vision and seeing a game and saying, accepting that the artist is saying this is going to be something much more than you're seeing now in 5 years. I think gamers, our audience is a lot more receptive to that now than they were 10 years ago, which is great for a lot of artists, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Darren, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about, your team is a fairly small team. The crew is a fairly small crew. For Hades, how important is it to find that focused vision in a game when you're kind of working at this kind of indie scale? A lot of times I'm sure folks are kind of, everyone's attention winds up getting diverted while you're kind of doing that work because you're doing it for so long. But I'm curious to hear the thoughts around, how do you kind of keep that focused vision?
Yeah, I mean, for us, Hades, we deliberately had our sort of shortest pre-production period we'd ever had. We wanted to see what we could do with a really focused pre-production period, and then planned to launch into early access to try a new process of development for us, and to really try to refine the game with the help of an audience and make it as good as we could with the input of players. And so I think part of the thing that kept us really honest was we had to deliver stuff regularly to humans who would play and evaluate it and give us feedback. So that's a really powerful motivator for staying on track, I think, is just we are now responsible to other people who aren't just us. And that added layer of incentive there, I think, was really good for keeping us on a sort of pre-regimented schedule for Hades.
Yeah.
The scary thing with Hades and with Kentucky Route Zero is you're making decisions like so early on in the process that you have to stick with in a lot of ways. And I know what they found, like I was making big story changes like weeks out from release, and that just wouldn't be possible in this world where like people have already played the first 2 hours of the game or whatever. Yeah, fair play. That's pretty scary.
I'm actually curious to hear more about that from Ifan. I want to know, you have had this kind of fascinating juxtaposition between, balancing the game's kind of grounded elements that are there, and then, these really surreal plot threads that are kind of, woven in there. What was the kind of inspiration behind presenting the game in that way?
The inspiration came from, so we started off with a diary, and then we realized we could erase it, and we could erase like not just like the text, but like layer. And then also at the time we had this kind of zooming mechanic, which gives this massive scale to things, which is in there, but like no one notices because it kind of just flows forward automatically where you used to have control. But that scale of things just brought the black hole in, and it was kind of always like the emotional center of it. It was this thing that was always eating away at Cassio and gnawing at her. And there had to be a moment when everything was obliterated because, it's a video game and you want big explosions. So yeah, the planet gets destroyed at one point, I think, like in a freaky climaxy sequence. But then it's kind of like, the end of the world is like rebirth. But the black hole was always there as an emotional thing. And there was points in the story where the two threads were like one thread, and the story was the story of Cassiopeia, the astronaut. But it was just so much more interesting to me to delve into the real life stuff. But when we had the real life stuff without the black hole stuff, it was just like, it didn't have that weight. So the black hole is very much, it lets us get a bit like weird, and it lets us, do things that feel true, without necessarily being like a biography. No one's going to write a biography of an American president with a black hole or something, But
you never know.
Do it
you never know.
Until we
my
have,
life as a black hole.
Yeah.
Oh man, I mean, I'm sure, with the way things are working, you never know. You never know where those stories will wind up coming. I think,
I
Arvi,
still want to find out. There's like the idea of Planet X, which is this planet I passed like Pluto, and it's
Yeah.
what like our black hole is called. And I still want that to be discovered to be like a primordial black hole. That's my hope. That's like hopefully nature is like on our marketing side. That'd be awesome.
Nature's gonna be like, hey, we got you. Here's our vertical slice of what we give you from nature, and see if we can figure it out in that way.
True. All true.
I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about why Seattle was the place to kind of land your game in, and kind of have that be the backdrop for Coffee Talk.
Oh yeah, one of the reason is we needed a setting that's in like a perpetual rain, and we thought like, Seattle has a very high, rain throughout the year. So that's like one reason. The second reason is like one of the biggest, coffee chains started in Seattle. When we did the game jam, Fahmi Hasni, back then he was like our marketing guy, and he wanted to make a game that emulates the feeling of like holding a warm drink and watching the rain while listening to music and talking to friends, like in a coffee shop.
Ah, okay. That makes total sense. I mean, the way that kind of lines up, that actually hits totally in line with what that would mean. I'm also curious to hear your thoughts about how you've kind of landed them not only in Seattle as a kind of backdrop for the game, but also kind of digging into this alternate reality version of the characters that you've built. And why did you decide to go in that direction as opposed to just having human characters kind of inhabit the coffee shop?
Yeah, so we realized like early on in the game development that the topic is it could be somewhat sensitive, and because we talk about like racial issues and immigration and stuff like that. So we wanted to make it like like talk about those tough topics, but kind of like put it in like in a different perspective, so that it's easier for people who played it to kind of like absorb the story without having any pre-existing prejudices or stuff like that. So we decided to make the game in an alternate reality where orcs, elves, and all these fantasy creatures live, but then they would kind of like mirror actual people in this world, and real problems that we might actually have, and that that turns out to be a lot easier for people to kind of like be immersed in the story, and hopefully it will give them like like food for thought, or like a thought-provoking conversation.
True. True.
Arvi, I'm kind of curious to hear from you too about Noita, and about kind of there's so much attention to detail. There's so much kind of like crammed into the game in that way that really impresses the player from all these different aspects. I'm curious to hear if you were to give another small team some advice about your process, what would it be to kind of help them kind of make the better game that they are hoping to bring to life?
Well, of course, the big question here is, what is the definition of better? I mentioned,
sure.
Like we have discussed this, and it's of course a kind of a subjective thing. But I guess if someone was to make this kind of a dynamic world, very emergent, very interconnected systems kind of thing, kind of like what Noita is, I would say that concentrating very heavily on what exactly it is that is the kind of fun or entertaining or whatever is supposed to be like the important thing of the game, and how do you bring the player as close to it as possible? How do you let the player get as much from it as possible. For us, we had this, as I mentioned earlier, we had this physics system, every pixel is simulated, and we knew that it's a lot of fun. It was fun to toy with. There have been this powder toy browser games for a long time that haven't had like a gameplay element, but have been still a lot of fun to play with. So we knew that it was fun. We noticed that destroying the world, transmuting materials to acid and seeing everything melt was fun to see. But we ran into the problem multiple times where we realized that, oh, if the game is just about, I don't know, you are a living explosion and you explode everything every single time, that stops being interesting. And actually realizing that giving restrictions require the player to be more creative by giving restrictions and asking the player, how do you creatively work your way around this restriction? Turned out to be a really important part of making the game interesting and making the game kind of have this balance between the player having freedom to kind of destroy the world and adjust the world, but also having these places where the player has to think, where they can't just like barge in and make everything go away and get the prize. It was a kind of a tight balance, but also a very interesting design problem that we spent quite a lot of time working on. So I would imagine that what I just said distilled into some kind of a very wise sounding sentence would be the best advice to give to a team who wanted to follow in our footsteps. Also, taking stuff from the mythology of your own country and using that in a game, because I don't think there has been a game that has had as many allusions to specifically Finnish mythology on the market so far. I might be wrong, but I think that especially those of our players who really get deep into the game, they have seemed to appreciate kind of a unusual mythology that hasn't really happened or appeared that much in games. Like Dark Souls is medieval mythology. It would be surprising to see like a Finnish god somewhere there, something. I would be excited.
I would love that. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I dig too. I want people to dig into their backgrounds and their cultural backgrounds to give us more stories. Because again, this space is perfect for that. It gives so many different versions of ways to kind of dig into that in a real way.
Yeah, I guess we could make like a collaborational game that is the autobiography of a black hole with like Nordic mythology included.
Yeah, please. I mean, that was like a huge thing with Defined as well, was like making it like so super Irish that it needs like annotations to understand, like we have so many games that are set in like Hollywood versions of things that aren't even the real thing. So like even in Kentucky Route Zero, it was cool that like like this is pulling from the real world as opposed to Hollywood. And like Hades got like so specific into the mythology. But yeah, I want more Finnish games and more games set in like the arse end of nowhere. It'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would be super cool. I'm dying for more stuff like that. I think there's so many cool things that we can dig into from those perspectives that, again, there's space for it. We just have to find folks who have the time and the energy to make it happen in a real way. We are at one of my favorite parts. My favorite part in general of doing these wonderful conversations is now I get to give an award away to one of you amazing folks. Hey, our winner for outstanding achievement for an indie game for the 24th annual D.I.C.E Awards goes to Hades. Hades is our winner.
Congrats. All right.
Congratulations. Awesome. Congrats. Give the folks a little bit at home a couple of words.
Yeah, geez. Thank you so much to D.I.C.E. This is amazing. And it's been a wild ride since Hades released into 1.0 in September. I mean, I want to say thank you to the incredible team of people that I work with at Supergiant, who are some of the best people I know and some of the most talented people I've ever met in my whole life. And I get to work with them every day. So that's awesome. I would like to say that I'm very grateful to our players for being so incredibly supportive and effusive and really just coming along for the ride. Players who joined us in early access and the players who've joined us since, and to see the reaction to Hades kind of blow up in a way that none of our previous games have to a degree has been really incredible, especially in sort of like a pretty dark time, a dark period in the world. It's nice to see people having things to say about Hades, that it helped them through something, it helped them cope with something, it helped them deal with it was a mirror for their daily life. You know, all that kind of stuff was really incredible for me personally to see. So I feel incredibly honored to receive this award on behalf of Supergiant. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us. Again, your games have been brilliant, and we can only hope that we'll be able to do this in person at some point in the near future. That would be fantastic to be able to do that as well. So everybody at home, we'll see you all in a little bit.